What if I told you the player who could completely change South Carolina's 2026-27 offense is not another 6-foot wing, not another 5-star freshman, and not another dominant post? She's 5'3". Ny'Ceara Pryor averaged 16.3 points, 7 assists, and 3.6 steals per game in the SEC, and somehow she might be an almost perfect answer to the biggest question Dawn Staley currently has. But there's one massive catch. As of August 19th, there's no verified report that Pryor has entered the portal, visited South Carolina, committed, or signed with the Gamecocks. So we're analyzing the rumor and the basketball fit, not reporting this as a done deal. And when you actually break down the numbers, this hypothetical gets very interesting very fast. South Carolina isn't lacking talent. That needs to be clear immediately. This team went 36-4, reached the national championship game, scored 85.6 points per game, and finished as one of the best teams in America. The question isn't whether Dawn Staley has enough weapons. The question is, who organizes all of them? Maddie McDaniel is no longer returning, and that changes the structure of this backcourt. You got Tessa Johnson, Jordan Lee, Jersey Robinson, Agate McKeer, Ayla McDowell, Justine Lubens. That is an absurd amount of perimeter talent, but having 6 talented guards is not automatically the same thing as having one proven veteran floor general, and that's why Pryor is such a fascinating theoretical addition, because her value isn't just, hey, here's another scorer. Her value is that she could allow everybody else to play a role that fits them better. .3 points, 7.0 assists, 3.6 steals. Those are not video game projections. Those are her Texas A&M numbers. And the assists are where this conversation starts. Pryor finished the season averaging 7 assists per game and recorded 8 points and assist double-doubles. She also became the first player this century to produce 4 consecutive points and assist double-doubles in SEC play. Think about what that means. We're not talking about somebody who occasionally creates for teammates. We're talking about somebody whose game is fundamentally built around controlling possessions. And South Carolina may desperately benefit from that type of player. Because if Tessa Johnson has to spend more possessions bringing the ball up, initiating offense, reading the first pick and roll, and organizing everybody, that's responsibility. But it also might be taking her away from what makes her dangerous. Imagine Pryor initiating, Johnson coming off movement, Jordan Lee attacking a tilted defense, Agate McKeer cutting against a rotating help defender, Joyce Edwards catching the ball after the defense has already been forced into rotation. That is the real argument for Pryor. She doesn't necessarily make South Carolina more talented. She potentially makes South Carolina's existing talent easier to use. Now here comes the obvious pushback. 5'3" on a Dawn Staley roster? When South Carolina has deliberately built what looks like a giant perimeter group? Fair question. Look at this. Tessa Johnson, 6'0", Jordan Lee, 6'0", Jersey Robinson. Listed by South Carolina at 6'0", Ayla McDowell, 6'1", Agate McKeer, 6'1", Justine Lubens, 6'2". Then imagine Pryor walking into that group at 5'3". That looks completely backwards. But basketball isn't a height competition. It's a matchup competition. And Pryor does something very differently from those bigger guards. She gets underneath people. She pressures the basketball. She attacks the handle. And despite being 5'3", she averaged 3.6 steals per game and became the shortest player ever selected to the SEC All-Defensive Team. That is ridiculous. So instead of asking, why would South Carolina add a tiny guard when they built a huge backcourt? Ask the opposite question. What if the huge backcourt is exactly what makes Pryor easier to play? Put 4 long defenders around her. Switch behind her when necessary. Use that size to cover screening actions. Let Pryor become the point of attack pest, while everybody behind her has length. Suddenly the contrast becomes useful. Now this is where the story gets almost cinematic. Ny'Ceara Pryor has 454 career steals. Do you know who else finished her college career with 454? Dawn Staley. Exactly 454. Not approximately. Not in the same range. 454 and 454. Pryor reached that number across Sacred Heart and Texas A&M Chem. And if she somehow received another season, joined South Carolina, and recorded one steal, she would pass Dawn Staley's collegiate total. While playing for Dawn Staley, you could not manufacture that storyline. And there's another number that shows how unusual Pryor's career has been. She finished with 2229 points, 598 assists, and 454 steals. According to the research, she's the only Division I player to reach at least 2,200 points, 550 assists, and 450 steals. That's not just a defensive specialist. That's not just a distributor. That's a guard who has generated an enormous amount of offense while creating possessions defensively. And if you're Dawn Staley, there are worse players to hypothetically hand your offense to. Now we have to make the other side of this debate. Because if we're pretending there are zero drawbacks, we're doing fan fiction instead of analysis. First problem, minutes. South Carolina already has a crowded perimeter rotation. Tessa Johnson needs touches. Jordan Lee transferred in after averaging 13.2 points per game at Texas. Jersey Robinson arrives with major expectations. Agat McKeer needs developmental possessions. And Pryor isn't some backup point guard who is going to happily play 11 minutes and run the second unit. She started all 27 games at Texas A&M. She averaged 16.3 and 7. This is a player accustomed to controlling the basketball. So whose opportunities shrink? That's the uncomfortable question. Because adding another great player doesn't create another 40 minutes. Someone loses touches. Someone loses ball handling opportunities. Maybe one of South Carolina's young guards develops slower because Pryor becomes the immediate answer. And maybe that's fine if you're trying to win a national championship right now. But there's still a trade-off. The second problem? Postseason matchup hunting. You know exactly what elite teams would do. High ball screen, force Pryor into the action, create a switch, try to get a bigger guard attacking downhill. Then do it again, and again, and again. Pryor is an elite ball thief. Those things can both be true. You can be incredibly disruptive defensively and still present a matchup question because of your size. So this becomes a coaching chess match. Can South Carolina keep her out of unfavorable switches? Can Joyce Edwards, Chloe Kitts, Ashlyn Watkins, and those long perimeter players erase enough mistakes behind her? Can Staley use aggressive coverages and ball pressure to prevent opponents from calmly entering matchup hunting offense? I actually think South Carolina is one of the best rosters in America for attempting it, but that's very different from saying the weakness doesn't exist. It does. Now let's build the lineup. Pryor at point guard, Tessa Johnson at the 2, Jordan Lee or Agat McKeer on the wing, Chloe Kitts at 4. Joyce Edwards inside. Immediately Pryor has multiple scoring options around her. Johnson can operate more naturally away from the ball. Lee gives you another perimeter creator. Kitts gives size and skill in the front court. Edwards becomes the interior finishing target. And that's where the 7 assists per game matter. South Carolina already had an elite offense. The goal isn't rescuing a bad offense. It's reducing the number of possessions where 5 talented players look at each other and ask, okay, who starts this? Pryor starts it. And once she creates the first defensive rotation, the talent takes over. That could be the difference between an offense that wins because it overwhelms you and an offense that also understands exactly where the advantage is coming from. And here's the part that makes this rumor possible at all. Pryor already completed 4 college seasons. She even spent time with the New York Liberty during WNBA preseason and was waived on April 30th. Normally, conversation over. But on July 31st, 2026, a federal judge issued class-wide relief affecting qualifying Division I athletes from the 2022-23 entry cohort who had exhausted 4 seasons under the previous system. That created an unusual 5th-year pathway and an August portal window. Keyword pathway. It does not mean Pryor definitely has another year, and it definitely does not prove she entered the portal or is going to South Carolina. That's why every version of this discussion has to remain hypothetical until credible reporting confirms otherwise. But the timing explains why people can even seriously discuss a player who is in WNBA camp potentially returning to college basketball months later. This is probably the most interesting debate. Maybe Dawn Staley doesn't need to solve point guard with a traditional point guard. Maybe that's the entire plan. Maybe South Carolina wants a positionless perimeter attack where Johnson, Lee, Robinson, and Makir share creation duties. Maybe the advantage is precisely that every guard is big enough to switch, attack, and defend multiple spots. And adding a 5'3" primary ball handler could move the roster away from that identity. That's a legitimate argument. But here's my counter. In March and April, simplicity matters. When you're playing another elite defense late in the shot clock in a one-possession game, having somebody whose natural instinct is to organize offense matters. South Carolina has enough scorers. They have enough size. They have enough athleticism. What Pryor theoretically adds is clarity, and that may be the rarest thing on an already loaded roster. So let's make the prediction. If Pryor were somehow eligible, entered the portal, and actually chose South Carolina, I think she would have to have an immediate path to significant minutes. Not because she's automatically the best perimeter player on the roster, but because she provides the skill set South Carolina has the least duplication of. True high-volume playmaking, 7 assists per game, 598 career assists, SEC-tested production, elite ball disruption. And she allows bigger scoring guards to spend more time scoring instead of organizing. Would she play 35 minutes every night? Probably not. Some matchups would demand larger defensive lineups, but against teams that struggle with pressure, against defenses that can't contain penetration, against opponents willing to turn games into transition chaos, Pryor could be absolute trouble. And that's why this rumor is so fascinating. South Carolina spent years building bigger, longer, and more interchangeable lineups, and the player who could theoretically unlock all of it might be the smallest player on the floor. A 5'3" guard, 7 assists per game, 3.6 steals, 454 career steals, exactly the same as Dawn Staley. It sounds strange. Basketball-wise, it makes more sense than people think. But until there's credible confirmation of portal entry or South Carolina involvement, treat it as exactly what it is. One of the most intriguing hypothetical roster OT moves of the offseason. If you're rocking with Gamecocks Zone, hit subscribe, because we're breaking down every major South Carolina roster storyline heading toward 2026-27, and I want a real answer in the comments. No fence sitting. If Ny'Ceara Pryor became available and Dawn Staley could add her tomorrow, are you taking the proven 5'3" floor general? Or are you protecting the minutes and sticking with South Carolina's giant positionless backcourt?